I don't know how I can go on.
Oh no, I agree. It's a different world now.
It's more than that. I just feel like I can never watch a movie again. Everything I see in the cinema will be empty when I know there's no chance that I'll see my best friend again.
I wouldn't go that far.
Well, he was incredible. There will never be another Alan Rickman. I loved Love Actually.
Oh, I thought we were talking about payphones.
You think it's a different world without payphones? You think My Best Friend is a payphone?
Well, I thought it was a bit extreme, but there've been plenty of great films with payphones in them and lots of... Oh, sorry, excuse me, I better get this. Hello?
How long has this been in the kitchen? Is this an exact replica of a London payphone? Is this where you spent the $2,000 I loaned you?
James, it's Alan Rickman. He says he'll pay back my $2,000 if you say that payphones are really cool. Oh, he says he'll return to life too and go to the circus with you like you always dreamed of.
Alan Rickman. All my debt paid. A day with my idol in my favorite place. You know what? I think I'll choose to be on the right side of history, Walt. Payphones suck. I'm now imagining your kitchen with a payphone. I can't get the image out of my head.
It's kind of stylish.
I think I would
kind of do that if you loaned me $2,000.
Well, I'm never loaning you $2,000 is the lesson from this little skit verse.
Yep. No, that's fair. Welcome to the Get Commanded podcast. It's the GCP brought to you by POG, Palms Off Gaming, sponsor of this podcast. The only place where thimbles are still cool. I'm your host, Walt.
And hello, Commander players. I'm your other host, James, the buddy side cop in Walt's series of episodes on Get Commanded. I'm like the lovable one, the sidekick, you know?
The lovable sidekick. And I'm probably like the Dr. Emmett Brown of this universe, you know? We got to get to the time machine.
Great Scott. Look, as we know, I usually make sure people know stuff about what we're getting up to before we get to the transmission every week.
True.
I always say before we do that, I'm surprised that I've got something to say. But this time it's very well timed. If you're listening to this episode in the morning in which it comes out, we're going to be streaming this very evening at 7 p.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Time.
So that'll be 14 hours from when this episode comes out. So if it's
so specific.
I don't know if it's 8 p.m. where you are right now, it'll come out 10 a.m. the next day. I don't know how that's going to work for your time zone. Yes, 7 p.m. ADT for our Friday. It might be your Thursday. But yeah, we're going to play some more Commander.
We're super keen. We've been loving just jumping on stream and just grabbing some of our friends and showing you what we actually play Commander because we talk about it for hours every single week.
It's true.
Yet it's very rare that you get to see us play. So yeah, come and hang out and see the decks that we talk about all the time. See us not listen to our own advice on this podcast.
That's a big one. And yeah, mostly see the ridiculous decks that you can't get enough of on the podcast because I won't stop talking about them. And I also won't stop playing them. I've played Barbala Saga about 6 times now. I don't care. It's fun. She's a witch and I like it.
It's slowly becoming one of my favorite Walt decks.
Wow.
To be fair.
Big words. All right.
Well, it wasn't in the time when we ranked your decks.
No.
It wasn't fully in yet. So I was like, I can't really judge it. But now I've seen it. It's a great deck. But look, if you can't join us live, we do have a YouTube, which we haven't really shouted out a lot in the past because, to be honest, it's kind of just sat there existing. I am making a big effort to start cutting our gameplay up and throwing it up on YouTube. Don't expect anything fantastic. My experience is not in video editing, so don't expect anything crash hot like, animations from game nights.
Nope.
But it's us playing Commander on YouTube, so you can go subscribe to our YouTube channel at Get Commanded. At a later date, we'll throw up the video from all our streams so you can watch the games there.
Yep, and they'll be just like watching the stream, to be honest, because we won't cut them. So you can sort of put on your headphones, put it on, and imagine that you had tuned in at 7 p.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Time on the 17th of January.
That was a beautiful segue. I
Thank
appreciate
you
you were like,
so much.
I need a segue back to reminding people about the actual date. You did it beautifully there.
Thank you. And speaking of segues, we have an incoming transmission. You can't just say speaking of segues like that's
And
a
then
segue.
just like cut it off.
It's an incoming transmission from the deep depths of the galaxy from the Space Commanders. It's time to get commanded.
In any given Commander game, there are an enormous number of variables that must be considered. However, the wisest Commander players will become proficient in noticing absence.
Interesting. Okay, because we've talked at length about threat assessment, but this is like threat assessment on like a... Would you say it's a macro scale or a micro scale? I'd say it's a macro scale. We're kind of taking a step back and looking at everything.
I
right?
guess so, yeah. Like we've talked before about like noticing like cards in people's hands and, noticing stuff that's not immediately obvious about like threat assessing and everything. But
We've talked about like problematic permanents that you should look out for. Like we've called out specific cards. But this is a bit more abstract, I feel.
It is. We got to notice absence. This is super weird. Looking for things you can't see is strange. I actually have a sort of story that kind of relates to this concept. I think it's going to be a good lens to look at this for.
Go on.
Can I take us back to World War II?
I'd prefer you didn't.
I'm
not sure if you've heard much about World War II. It wasn't the greatest period of human history.
Look, we'll take it back at the macro level so we don't have to get too close. World War II. So, specifically, the Air Force, the Allies' Air Force. So, the Allies, at one point in the war, were looking at reinforcing their planes, right? They wanted to protect the vulnerable areas of the plane, make them more robust, less likely to be shot down by the enemy, right?
I have heard this story. I love this story. I see where you're going with this.
Okay, so bear with me. So they obviously covering the entire plane with an extra layer of metal would have been too heavy. The plane wouldn't take off. It wouldn't be maneuverable enough. So they were like, okay, we've got to decide where on the plane we're going to reinforce. Add some extra levels of metal, make it so that they won't get shot down. So they decided to analyze the locations that were most frequently shot in the planes that were returning from battle, right? They were sort of getting the planes to come in. They were going, okay, where have the bullets hit the plane here? And they concluded that the areas that they should reinforce based on how often they were being shot were the tail, the wingtips, the center of the fuselage, and the central wings area behind the engine, right? They worked out, look, this is where they're all being shot. If we reinforce these areas, maybe they're less likely to be shot down. Makes sense. That's where the enemies are shooting, right?
100%. I mean, like, if you see a hole in there, that means it's not strong enough.
Yeah, got to put something over that hole. However, a mathematician called Abraham Wald pointed out that the locations that they were analyzing were based on the areas that had been shot on planes that were returning from battle.
Yes, these are the planes that got home safe.
Yes. So actually, the areas that Abraham suggested, the areas they should reinforce on the plane was actually everywhere except the areas that had been shot on the planes that were coming back from battle. Why? Because clearly when the plane is shot on the tail, wingtips, center of the fuselage, and central wings area behind the engines, the planes come back.
Yeah, let's have a think about the other areas on the plane that we didn't list there, like the cockpit and the engines.
Yes.
If you shoot one of those areas, it's pretty likely you're going down.
Yeah.
Mayday, you're going down. But you're totally right. You can't analyze that thing, right?
Yeah.
You can only see the ones that come back safe, and the ones that have holes in the wings landed safely.
Yeah. So it's a mistake. And the huge missing variable here is obviously there's a huge amount of data that would make this analysis really helpful, which is if they could see every plane that had gone down.
But most of those planes are rubble.
Yes, they don't come back from going down in the enemy territory. So yes, that was the conclusion, was they should protect all the areas that had not been shot. So this is what we call survivorship bias, right? We're prioritizing information or data based on the kind of exceptional examples in a group. So in this case, it was the ones who'd returned, the survivors from something. This is where we get survivorship from.
Is this where that term was coined?
I think I don't know that the term was coined then, but this is sort of the earliest example we can see of people being like, this is like an interesting bias that people are falling for.
I have heard this story before. And
Yeah.
I think it's so cool that it like shows you the things that you don't see are so important.
Yeah, well, it's this bias is really common everywhere, basically. Like, it's very common for people to make this mistake. The biggest and most obvious one is actually in business. You see people going like, back when Apple was starting up, these are the steps that they did to become a successful business. I should emulate them. But people have done some sort of more macro analyses of different businesses and have found that actually, if you look at like the 90% of businesses that fail, a lot of the tips that are being spouted by the really successful businesses are the same ones that the failed businesses did, because you can't account for luck. Some people got lucky and the business took off, and most of them did not.
And also, like if we're going down the line of business, you can have a great product, like a fantastic product, and do kind of lackluster marketing. But if it's a great product, people will buy it. But if you do way over the top marketing and a shit product, no one's going to buy it because it's a shit product. So like it's the thing of like, sometimes you'll see things everywhere, but it doesn't reflect what it actually is. And sometimes you won't see things anywhere and it'll be there.
Yeah, well, it's not like you can go into a shop and someone shows you all the products that didn't make it.
Yes.
You don't walk in and someone goes like, oh, actually, there's a warehouse at the back here. It's the size of an aircraft carrier.
Yep.
And it's full of all of these failed products if you wanted to have a look at them. That doesn't happen.
And World War II Lancaster bombers and Spitfires, apparently.
We've got this guy called Abraham Wald back here. He's great. Anyway, Commander. We have a Commander podcast. We shouldn't talk too much about business in World War II.
That would just make us like every other white duo of men in their mid-20s that have a podcast.
It's true. Also, like all of those duos of men, we don't know anything about World War II.
Yes, true. I went to Winston Churchill's war rooms while I was in England.
Oh, so you're qualified.
Yeah, no, I'm a historian now. Welcome to the
Victoried
podcast.
History is told by the victorious. Commander, right? In Commander, I reckon we can kind of see this same thing, and I reckon this is sort of what the Space Commanders are alluding to, which is the survivor, if we're looking at a game of Commander, is the winner, right?
Yeah.
One person,
what did they do right?
What did they do right? And also, like, we're going to look at the things that they obviously did, especially on, like, the turn they win. You know, sometimes you'll see this, right? Like, I'll be in a game of Commander, and someone will be about to win, and they'll cast some super cool splashy spell, and that's what gets them over the line.
I do think this can be a bit of a trap for new players,
Big time.
Looking at the things that happen in a game and missing the subtle things that you don't see, which is what we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
But like a new player might see the splashy, overwhelming stampede and go, wow, I need to put 30 of these in my deck because this is the card that makes me win.
Yeah, but they'll miss the fact that that player played a tutor the turn before, or that player drew 15 cards the turn before.
Yeah.
So those are the sorts of things that beginner players will miss. But we all do this, right? There's obviously, we notice the things we notice, and the most noticeable things that happen in a Commander game are like the winner and the way they won,
or the card
specifically the card. But we're very much more likely to miss the actions that were taken by players who lost. And especially the things that players did that slowed down other players who didn't win, right? We're not going to notice the fact that, like, James, like let's say I won that game. It's very unlikely we're going to notice that James almost won, right?
Yeah, if I was, like, so close to a win, and if it wasn't just for that really well-timed removal or, like, something like that, like, I could have got over the line. I also think there's something else here. I think there's, like, the thing that we don't miss is all the actions, all the, like, stuff like sandbagging that the winner didn't show us. Like, you know, the winner of that game very clearly could have been a winner, but maybe they didn't deploy the win con as soon as they drew it. Maybe they waited for the optimal moment. That's something you don't see.
No, you don't.
It happens.
You don't see other players' hands, right? So you don't know when they're holding back and when they're deploying a different threat or like baiting out a counterspell. You know, all these things are things we can't see unless we're told, obviously, after the game. So
this is like psychoanalyzing Commander. This is
it's next level,
wildly detailed. I'm so glad that you're listening to us because it makes me feel like we're not weirdos for overanalyzing a game of cardboard.
Yeah, it's
like, that's
true.
what we're playing here.
It's
just
true.
to make sure we're not in any disillusioned world where this is like analyzing World War II. No, we're playing a game.
We're playing
people.
a game. We're just taking it to the next level for whatever reason. Look, I reckon the slant we can take here to cancel out this sort of bias towards noticeable things that we see in Commander is I think we can still look at things that we can see, like cards and like strategies people are employing, and we can look at the things we can see, but we can see what those things represent and form conclusions about the things we can't see. So I reckon the way we can do this command is like run through a bunch of examples of things that we see in Commander that are like somewhat noticeable, but then talk about all the things that they sort of hide behind them. You know what I mean? Like things that look like something
zooming out.
Yeah.
That's
exactly.
I like this. Like we're gonna look on a macro scale because we're looking at like more than just what's directly in front of us. We're trying to see what that is building to. It's like a small piece of a mosaic.
Yeah.
And we're trying to zoom out to see the bigger picture.
Yeah.
It's going to bug me now, but there's this comedian that does a very funny joke kind of in line with this. He gets on stage and he says something like, we're all disillusioned. We think we're, people walking around and living our lives. We are so insignificant in terms of the world. And then he says something like, you think you're in America right now? Zoom out. You're on a rock hurtling through space. Like... It's kind of like that. I can't remember the comedian now. I wanted to shout him out. He's very funny, but I can't remember his name. But
I see what you mean.
Yeah. Zoom out.
Miss the forest for the trees, definitely.
Yeah, that's actually quite a poetic one.
I like that
We're
one.
going with that one.
We're going with that one. Speaking of the forest, no, it's not a good segue. Stacks.
Oh yeah, perfect segue.
Wood stacks. It's a stack of wood. Like in a
I get it was a stretch.
I'm so clever. Stack species. So we're going to talk about some stack species here. I want to be clear because we've done this before when we talked about stacks. People think of stacks, they think of cards like smokestacks and stasis and stuff, and those are stacks pieces. But the definition we use for stacks is just any permanent that sits on the battlefield and prevents or dissuades your opponents from making certain actions. And this is basically...
We did an episode on stacks a while ago.
We did, the stacks threshold, a long time ago now. But yeah, it's basically we use this definition of a permanent that sits there, stops your opponents, to contrast it with removal, right? Which tends to be, Swords to Plowshares, Path to Exile.
It interacts with your opponent directly.
Stops that one thing, but this is kind of like a wide effect that sits and stays there.
And really important to note, there is a spectrum of stacks where there is hard stacks like smokestacks, like tangle wire, those kinds of things, stasis. And then there are kind of soft stacks effects where it's like your opponent may do this or like other, where it doesn't feel as brutal.
Yeah.
That's how to like... In a 20-second explanation, that's kind of our opinion on stacks.
That was the very short version of that very long episode on stacks that we did way back when. But yeah, so basically we're talking about permanents that in some way either prevent or dissuade your opponents from doing certain things.
Dissuade is a good word.
Yeah, I like dissuade too. Who wrote that? Oh, God, that's so good. I don't even know what's going on right now.
Walt wrote that. If that wasn't clear to anyone, Walt wrote that.
No, the Space Commanders told me to, James. Thank you very much. Talion, Kindly Lord.
Ooh, this was one of my least favorite cards from 2023.
You said that. I remember now.
Yeah.
Well, you've seen a lot more of it because you've played a lot more CDH. This is
I think it's a lot more prevalent in CDH than it is in casual.
This was the one that Command Zone did a super interesting episode on where they analyzed the ideal choice. I should tell you what a card does briefly first. 2 generic, blue and a black. It's Dimir card. It's a legendary creature, so it can be your commander. I think doesn't matter at all what any of the text on the card is.
I think it's a 3/4.
Sure.
With flying.
That sounds right. We'll go with that. The key line of text is, when it enters the battlefield, you choose a number between 1 and 10.
1 and 10.
1 and 10. And then whenever an opponent, casts a spell with mana value, power, or toughness equal to the number you've selected, that player loses 2 life and you draw a card.
Yeah, and the key thing about this card that a lot of people were confused on when it came out is, okay, so if someone chooses 2 and I cast a Dockside Extortionist, does it trigger twice because it's mana value 2 and toughness 2? No, it's the same card, so it'll only trigger Talion once.
Yes.
You will lose 2 life and the Talion controller will draw 1 card.
But it does mean that the net that Talion casts is a lot wider than you initially think, right?
Oh, yeah.
Because
there'll be 3
2.
CMC creatures with 2 toughness or 2 power.
Very common, right? And it doesn't have to be power and toughness. Like you can have a 2/3, you can have a 3/2. Like any of these things will let you draw a card if you're Talion.
This is why this card is seeing so much CDH play, because like the second you go, oh, okay, it can't be that good in CDH. It's like not doing much. But in Dimir, if you're playing like a mid-range strategy, this card is unbelievably good. Like it's so strong.
One of the best draw engines probably in the format, and it can be in your command zone. Like that is wild.
It is next to Rhystic Study.
It's
and
close.
not only that, it's not only a draw engine, it is actually a win con because it is draining your opponents.
Yeah.
It's not going to win you the game on its
No.
own, but it can.
Yeah,
you know?
the value matters. Anyway, so with the framework that we're looking at for this, what do you reckon? What do we see with Talion? I think we see the cards being drawn, right? That's pretty
Yes.
obvious. We see our life total going down. We see someone draw a card. That's pretty obvious.
Yeah, I will say that I think that for reasonably experienced players will see cards being drawn.
Yeah.
For new players, I think cards being drawn can also be one of the things players miss.
I completely agree.
So if you are a new player, notice when people are drawing cards.
Oh, yeah.
Because that is a real thing that's happening in the game and can be very dangerous to you later in the game.
You've probably heard experienced players say, how many cards in hand? You know, James, how many cards in hand? Or something just like generally, how many cards are in hand? Yes, they might be about to cast Jessica's Will, is usually when it's being asked. But sometimes it's
2020 changed that.
Sometimes when I'm looking at like, using my removal, there might be two players who I think have roughly equal boards, and I'll ask them how many cards in hand each of them have. If one player has one card in hand and the other person has 6, the person with 6 cards in hand is a lot more threatening. Yes, that one card in the other person's hand might be amazing, but you don't know that.
And
but
on a
you do know there's 5 more cards in that hand.
On a deeper level, if they have the exact same cards in their hand, how many cards have they just drawn recently?
Yeah.
Maybe they've both got 7 cards in hand, but let's say one of those players just drew 20 cards and
then
discarded down to 7.
Makes
They
a
have
big
the
difference.
best 7.
The best 7 they could
Yeah.
have in the top 20 cards in their library. That's crazy. What else? So I agree. I think cards get missed sometimes. What else do we think Talion represents behind the cards? Because
So the bigger picture of Talion.
The bigger picture of
The thing we
Talion-
can see is Talion triggering, a card going into my opponent's hand, and me losing 2 life.
Yes.
What's the bigger picture?
I think the bigger picture with Talion is, especially later in the game, people stop casting spells.
Oh,
Right?
I mean, 2 life is I play a Liesa Shroud of Dusk deck.
Yeah.
And it's a similar thing. Like, you get people choosing the one spell that they really want to cast.
Yeah.
Above, chaining 2-3 spells together. Because,
Yeah.
if you get 3 Talion triggers on your turn, that is 6 life.
It adds up, and especially later in the game, like if I'm at 6 life and someone has a 4/4 flyer and I have no flying blocks, I just can't cast a 2-mana spell. Right?
Yeah.
Or I'm dead. Like I might have a handful of 2-drops and I'm just like,
Yeah.
cool. Like basically the Talion player has infinite counter spells right now. Like that's what this represents.
Yeah, that's a really interesting thing about Talion is once it gets to that real late game, because a lot of Talion players add in their decks things like Blood Chief Ascension,
Yeah.
and they're bringing those life totals really low really quickly. Which, to be fair, just because you're on 6 life, 10 life doesn't mean you're out of the game.
No, and especially not in CDH,
Yes,
right?
we know that life totals are not a scoreboard in Commander.
Mm.
You can win on 1 life, and it's the same win as you winning on 40 life.
Yeah.
Like, it's the exact same. So the life totals doesn't necessarily represent the true thing that's happening. The true thing that's happening is that there are players that are now choosing not to cast spells
Yeah.
of particular mana values because they don't have the resource left to use.
No, it's gonna add up, and especially in the late game. Like, and again, like the whole episode is about noticing absence, right? You can't see the spell someone doesn't cast. Like the Talion player might have just barely got there because someone had a removal spell that was 2 mana value. And they couldn't cast it.
And I do think that this does make us if we slant even further and go into the how does this make us a better Commander player, it makes us a better Commander player because we're aware of just how strong Talion is as a card.
Yeah.
Because now we know, okay, well how is it affecting me? It's not affecting me that bad, but how is it affecting Walt? Oh my god, Walt's not cast a spell for 2 turns.
Yeah.
Walt's really in a bit of a pickle here. So maybe there's an opportunity there to notice that absence, see Walt is really struggling,
Yeah.
and, typical James fashion, go, hey, Walt, what's it worth to you for me to remove Talion?
Valid, honestly. Yeah, Talion's a good one for sure. I think another one that we can miss the forest of the trees on is tax effects, right? In this sort of stacks area.
Like Ristic Study, Smothering Tide.
Yeah.
Like whenever you do something, pay a certain amount of mana unless you want your opponent to get value.
To get some sort of thing. Yeah. I think we tend to see, well, yeah, depending on the experience level, we tend to see the cards being drawn. I think definitely with Smothering Tide, we see the treasures.
Yes.
You can't miss the treasures.
My God,
there.
it adds up quick.
Yeah. So I think we see those things, and I think people mostly justifiably go like, oh, that's a problem. I think that we don't see necessarily with especially these cards that make things cost more, that a lot of spells are probably sitting in people's hands not being cast. Like you hear people say a lot online, and we've even said it probably before, that like good players just tend to pay every Ristic Study trigger, right? They know how good the card is. They just treat the card as if it says spells cost 1 more to cast. Never give someone a card.
Because if you do that, then the player that cast Ristic Study just cast a 3-mana enchantment. That's it. That's all they've done.
Well, but it's interesting because the 3-mana enchantment they've cast, though, does now say spells cost 1 more to cast.
Noticing the absence.
Yeah, and so then, like, you know, yes, in a turn, it might not be that noticeable difference. Over several turns, so if you're spending 1 more on every single spell, like, that might be the difference between deploying, 3 3-drops in a turn or 2 4-drops.
Yeah, or it's the equivalent of like, let's say you just have like, let's do like simple math here. You have a hand and you've got 4 mana available to you and you have 4 1-drop spells.
Yeah.
Are you going to let someone draw 4 cards?
No.
Or are you going to maybe play 2 1-drop spells and pay the tax one, pay the 1 for each of those spells? Because if for me, I am like you said, I'm a pay the 1 player all the time. I will try my best to always pay that 1.
Yeah.
But like, it's very tempting to deploy all of your cards.
Yeah.
And I think that this is the thing of like, it's such a strong effect that's happening. But the thing that's really happening, especially if people are paying that 1 and slowing the game down, you can notice this and be like, hey, they paid the 1 twice. Maybe that means that's 1 or 2 cards that they didn't cast. What have they still got in their hand?
Yeah. And also, like, how much better do these cards look now? Yes, Ristic
so
Study
much.
might sometimes never draw you any cards, but over the course of a game, oh my God, that person didn't deploy like 5 of their threats.
This is
over the course of a game.
This is a good analysis to why these cards are so strong.
Yeah.
Is because even when they don't do the thing that it looks like they want to do, even when you're not seeing it do the thing, it's still doing a thing.
Yeah.
You just can't see it.
No, the spells just become invisible.
Yeah, basically. They never get cast.
They never get cast. You never hear about them. You never see them again. I think in a similar vein, Graveyard Hate can do this, especially Graveyard Hate. I've got a particular card in my mind here, which is Scavenging Ooze.
Oh, like targeted removal in the graveyard.
Yes.
Yeah.
But also that just sits there. Like if someone has a Scavenging Ooze and any green mana open, they just have the potential to remove any card in a graveyard at any time, right?
Very similar to how I play my Scarab God deck. I leave mana open with Scarab God to target things in other people's graveyards.
Playing your own graveyard deck against a Scarab God deck is not fun.
Or against a Scavenging Ooze.
Yes, Scavenging Ooze, same thing. So I think with Scavenging Ooze, the thing we see is we do see less recursion used, right? Like someone will probably not, unless they don't see it, cast Reanimate on their, Thrashing Brontodon.
That was a weird choice.
I don't know why that's the card that appeared in my mind.
Fair enough.
Thrashing
3-mana
Brontodon.
dinosaur. There you go. That's the thing you want to reanimate. But no, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Because that player would, if they're casting Reanimate on their Thrashing Brontodon, and their opponent has a Scavenging Ooze across from them and pays the 1 and just exiles the Thrashing Brontodon in response, it is like you've just wasted mana.
It's a 2-for-1 for that player, right? Who's got the Scavenging Ooze. They have successfully counterspelled your Reanimate and permanently dealt with your Thrashing Brontodon.
And put a +1 counter on it and gained life.
They're not going to refuse that offer.
No, it's way too good. So the player that's wanting to cast Reanimate just won't.
Yes.
And that's the result. And I think that there's like even more things that specifically cards like Scavenging Ooze do when you just see them. Like, if you're in a deck where you can tutor things to your graveyard, you don't do it.
No.
Because you're like, well, that's just like saying on a big neon sign. If we're talking about things that go unnoticed, this is a thing that goes noticed.
Yes.
If you tutor something to your bin, let's say like Grey Merchant of Asphodel.
Oh, yeah.
That's like screaming, I'm going to reanimate this with Rise of the Dark Realms. Everything's going to come back and I'm going to kill you. Like, that is a huge red flag that you're about to lose.
And again, like, no one's going to refuse that call. No one who's got a scavenging ooze is going to be like, let's see what happens.
I'll let you have Gary.
No way.
I'll let you have Gary.
It's not going to happen. I think, even more than that, though, I think what then happens, if we're sort of walking this through from the perspective of that poor person playing the graveyard deck, yes, they're going to probably not tutor things to bin. They're probably going to not get Gary in bin in any capacity. I think the other thing that they're going to do instead is they're going to spend loads of their mana trying to draw cards to find a response to Scavenging Ooze.
Yeah, true. They're probably not even developing their own board state in other ways. It's because their win condition is being like blockaded by one card.
They're not going to like do nothing, right?
Yes.
If they have the ability, they're going to instead try to draw cards. And
They'll dig for that Feed the Swarm.
Yeah. And so now though, it's interesting. Like there's so much that Scavenging Ooze is doing, right? The Reanimate's not being used. The tutors aren't happening. The Gary's not being put in bin. And now the player is like fully pivoting all of their resources into drawing cards instead. That is so much value stapled to that Scavenging Ooze.
Imagine if Scavenging Ooze read, like on the card, when it enters the battlefield, target opponent can't make any other game actions unless it's drawing cards. Like, imagine if a card said that, we'd all look at it and go, that's fucking ridiculous.
I'm playing that.
Wizards into 2030, maybe, but as of today, if a card came out that read that, we'd all be like, that's ridiculous.
We have to play that.
In those situations where someone is playing a graveyard deck, Scavenging Ooze says that. And I think as the player that's holding the Scavenging Ooze in hand, if they look at Scavenging Ooze and goes, there's nothing really to target in graveyards yet, I won't cast this. Wrong. Because there is a graveyard player sitting across from you. If you have Scavenging Ooze, just leave open one mana and you will be, again, pivoting that entire player's resources to finding an out.
Yeah.
And while they're doing that, you can build your board.
Oh, I think if the next level, I think, of how you utilize this skill, or just like something you should be aware of when you're doing this, like if you're the Scavenging Ooze player, is think about that you're spending nothing. You know what I mean? Now, the threat of Scavenging Ooze is so much that you could probably never exile a creature card. As long as you have the green open, like you have to threaten it. You can't like tap out. But if you have the threat of that, you can now spend 0 resources on that. And CDH players are so aware of this, which is why they politic all the time. Because if you can convince someone to use their removal spell, it's like you have a 0 mana spell that says Swords to Plowshares on it.
Yeah. I love getting people to use their removal. I love having like a removal spell in hand and managing to wheedle table politics for someone to use theirs. And I'm like, well, that was free.
Well,
that was great.
We will go into that because I'm aware that is definitely a strategy we should be using. I think the last one I want to talk about in this sort of Staxy area is, we mentioned them somewhat recently in the Cards at the Crux episode, but prison effects. Effects like Ghostly Prison, Propaganda, Solitary Confinement. I think we'll keep this a bit brief because we talked about it a lot in that episode. But we tend to see the minor annoyance when someone goes to combat and goes like, oh, I can't swing at James. That's kind of annoying. I guess I'll swing this way. I think what we miss that's Propaganda is doing is like how much higher that player's life total will be towards the end of the game. How much damage is now being redirected directly to that player's opponents, because people are not going to just go like, I can't swing at James, I guess I won't attack.
Yeah. Oh, this Galt is a 12/12 with trample.
Yeah.
But I can't swing it at James. Never mind. I don't have 2 other opponents that I can swing at.
Yeah.
I see what you're saying here. Like, the thing that you don't see is their life decreasing, but the value of that is the thing that you're not seeing, and that's a huge thing. There was actually, on our YouTube channel, there is a game uploaded right now where I managed to get a combo with Savine the Chronoclasm and Pariah in play. And I basically, the way that works is it's 2 replacement effects, right? Pariah says that any damage dealt to me would be dealt to Savine, and Savine prevents any damage that would be dealt to him, full stop.
So basically what happens is I go to combat, I attack James, the damage is redirected from James to the Pariah enchanted creature, in this case Savine, and then Savine says, prevent all damage that would be dealt to me, no damage ever gets dealt to James.
It's an amazing combo. It's even
sick.
better than Ghostly Prison. But like, I was playing playing in that game, and I think I think there's a moment in the video where I say, man, I'm really upset that this combo isn't working as well because you were playing an Aristocrats deck.
Yeah.
And Aristocrats makes you lose life, and that's not damage, so therefore the combo doesn't work.
Yeah.
But then someone in our Twitch chat, I think it was Pad, actually, one of our regular viewers, Pad, was like, actually, James, look at Walt's board. Walt could have swung at you for the past, 3 turns with a lot of tokens.
Yeah.
And that's probably equivalent to what your life total is now. You would be dead if it wasn't for that combo.
But we can't see it because it doesn't happen, right?
Yes.
We don't see the damage that isn't dealt to us.
I only see the ones that are dealt to me.
Yeah, fully. I think that's all I want to say about stacks. I reckon the next sort of section we can talk about, I think I'm sort of broadly thinking about this as known answers. And I have a bit of an analogy here that I saw Shivam Wheeler. Not Shivam Wheeler. It's Shivam Wheeler Love Magic is the podcast. Shivam Bhatt. I think Shivam Bhatt.
Great content creator.
I think he's on the Commander Advisory Group.
Yeah. He's played a bunch on Shuffle Up and Play with the Prof.
Yes.
I love the way he builds Commander decks as well. I think he's very
Hyper
focused
casual.
On the fun and weird interactions of Commander, and I respect the hell out of that. You know what I noticed as well the other day?
Yeah.
If you Google our podcast comes up next to Shivam's.
I love that.
That's so cool.
I think that's where we belong.
So Shivam, if you're listening, what's up?
Yeah, it's a good place to be. So Shivam on Twitter was talking about this idea that him and Wheeler have talked about a few times of rattlesnake cards. And the example that he gave in this category, there's a couple of other categories, but this is the main one I was interested in. Lieutenant Kurtar is this old card from Odyssey or something like that.
I was about to say, I didn't immediately recognize it. So.
It's an old one. It's a 3-mana white creature. It's like a 2/3 flyer or something, but you can sacrifice it for 1 and a white to exile an attacking creature. And he basically calls this type of card a rattlesnake card because the creature doesn't actually have to do anything, but it dissuades so much from happening. If you see a rattlesnake, the rattle is not killing you. The rattle is being stay away.
I'm scary. I'm a rattlesnake.
I'm scary. Stay away from me. And so he basically was like, yeah, if you are attacking and someone has a Lieutenant Kurtar, you're just not going to attack that player, right? And so the rattlesnake kind of puts you off and sends you towards an easier target.
I was so confused of what the rattlesnake bit meant, but I get it. That rattle is going, come at me, bro.
Yeah.
And it's honestly, and when I play these cards, I lean into that so hard.
Big time.
I am a player that if I know I have a threat to someone, if they try something on me, I'll point it out and I'll be like, do you really want this to happen to you? And something that I notice you do a lot, and maybe it's because you've thought about noticing absence, is when I'm threatening players with that, you'll go, one of us needs to do it at some point.
Yeah.
Someone's going to have to get the rattlesnake to jump.
Well, this is the thing about Lieutenant Kurtar, right? If everyone just leaves it for 12 turns, it's like he, for one, never paid 1 and a white to exile an attacking creature. It's also as though 12 times a creature could have been exiled,
yeah,
right?
because Lieutenant Kurtar's ability is sacrifice itself. So it's a once-used thing.
Yeah, maybe you'll bring it back with a Sun Titan or something. That would be a pretty sweet combo, not going to lie. But
I really like that.
But, if we're talking about one turn cycle, that's not going to happen before another turn.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's going to be Lieutenant Kurtar, someone attacks it, yes, that thing gets exiled. 2 other players have free attacks now.
It's very similar to, just a Mazavith.
Yeah.
Someone with a Mazavith is doing a very similar thing. Granted, that's repeatable, but they can only tap it unless they've got a Seedborn Muse or Splendid
For the purposes
Reclamation.
of this discussion, they're tapping it once.
They're tapping it once. It's one of these things where, especially when there's this threatening thing, I think the lesson to learn here is talk with your opponents and say, one of us is going to have to do this to get that threat off the board.
Yeah. And look, I think the thing you should need to look at when you're looking at these rattlesnake cards is, again, like we were talking about before, what they represent, right? So I think that something similar happens. You just mentioned this just a moment ago. If you know someone has removal, right? If we see, for whatever reason, maybe someone has to reveal from the top of their library or something, if I see a disenchant go into James's hand, I am aware that disenchant is there. That is known. I can see that. What I don't see and what that disenchant represents could be an omniscience never being cast.
Yeah, yes, because why would you cast something that's immediately going to go away?
Especially a 10 mana something.
Yeah.
Even a Bolus of Citadel, right?
Yeah.
If I have a Bolus of Citadel in my hand and I know James is a disenchant, my Bolus of Citadel is a blank card in my hand, right? I'm not going to drop it, maybe cast one spell for free off the top of my library, and then have it be removed. It's not worth it.
I see where you're going with this stuff in terms of known answers, like these rattlesnake, like a revealed disenchant is similar to a rattlesnake card on the field.
Yeah.
Because it's this thing of, don't do anything,
Don't do it, don't
I'll
do it.
bite.
But-
And I think it's the same things like with protection pieces, right?
yeah.
Like counter spells are the same deal.
100%.
Teferi's Protection, same deal.
Yeah.
This basically means, specifically Teferi's Protection, I want to call out. If you know someone's got a Teferi's Protection in hand and you need to wipe their board and they've got 3 open mana,
Yeah.
are you casting the board wipe?
No.
Yeah.
The board wipe is not going to get cast unless you can politic with someone else who's got a counter spell.
Yeah.
That's going to be your
Back me
only
up.
out. Yeah, back me up. But yeah, you're totally right. The thing that we see is, the counter spell, maybe the Teferi's Protection, but it represents an immunity from board wipes, basically, for that player, as long as they have that 3 mana open.
And I think this is where we can learn from noticing this absence and noticing these rattlesnakes, because we can then use the knowledge that we know that how powerful that effect is and lean into it. The other day, I think I cast a board wipe into a known protection spell. And I was like, whoops, that was a big mistake.
Yeah.
But it means the player used the protection spell. And I think in a couple of turns later, the permanents kind of came back in or were unprotected. I think it was a Guardian of Faith. Do you remember this game? You were in it.
Oh.
It was the Guardian of Faith, 3 mana flash, exile. Any number of creatures phase out.
No. That Guardian Effect.
Yes.
I'm thinking of the game that's actually just gone up on Franken's YouTube channel, Commander the Gathering.
Oh, yeah.
That similar thing happened in
I
that.
did do a similar thing there, yeah.
But funnily enough, both of those cards were phasing cards.
Yes.
Guardian of Faith and the card that was cast.
The Ripple of Time or whatever it's called.
Yeah, no, Guardian of Faith
Blue,
totally
yeah.
does it, which is that ETBs, any number of other creatures you control phase out.
But the lesson learned was I made him have it,
Yes.
and then he used it.
Yes.
And then later in the game, my opponents, even though I maybe might be tapped out of resources now, my opponents still see the real problem and can then put in the work.
I agree. I think the worst thing you can do is leave it, right?
Because then it
leave the
becomes
player.
a really good rattlesnake, right?
Yeah, well,
a
it
really
becomes-
good rattlesnake is the one that doesn't have anyone attack it.
No, it becomes 5 copies of that card
Yes.
for free that never have to be cast, and no mana is spent on them.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. I think in a similar vein, we can see this with on-board protection. And I want to call out a specific card here, which is Kira Great Glass Spinner.
God, this is the one that comes back, doesn't it? It's the one that
I don't think it comes back. It's 1 blue, and it says permanents you control have. When this creature becomes the target of a spell or ability for the first time each turn, counter that ability or spell.
Sorry, I was thinking of Glen Elendra. No, this one's even more annoying than Glen Elendra.
Yeah. So this basically, yes, it says just the first spell, but in practice, mostly one removal spell is going to be cast, if any, on a turn, right?
And it's usually all you have in hand.
Yeah.
To be perfect. When was the last time you saw both Swords to Plowshares and Path to Exile in your hand at the same time?
And want to use both of them on one creature.
And you weren't dreaming.
Yeah. It's rare, right? So yeah, we see the Kira, we see it be a bit annoying, but I think similar to that propaganda thing of going I guess I'll go this way, I think sometimes we just redirect our removal spells elsewhere, but now the Kira controller has hexproof, basically.
Yeah, instead of the
right?
card reading what it reads, it now reads, creatures you control have hexproof.
Yeah. It's a huge problem. And same deal. If we don't deal with that, then it just continues to say hexproof on it.
Yeah.
You have to see that beyond this immediate thing that's annoying, a bit of an annoyance now, is the infinite annoyance that will come with it sticking on the battlefield.
Crap. I think what we're telling our listeners to do is make the rattlesnake bite.
Yeah.
That is terrible advice.
It's terrible.
If you see a rattlesnake, don't attack it.
This
Don't make it bite.
Applies to all circumstances except actual rattlesnakes, in which case, don't do that. Instead, take the advice from Mean Girls, which is really good. If a snake bites you, suck the venom out with your mouth. That works. And thank you, Mean Girls, for saving many lives.
You got a real hang up on that, don't you?
Don't do that. It doesn't work. You will die.
Take it from the Australians. We've had many snake bites, spider bites, all the venom. Have you ever heard of a drop bear?
Yeah.
Drop bears are a real thing. You know what? I think we need a break.
Yeah, I think we do need a break. I think we need to take a thrifty interlude.
It's a little break that won't cost you that much money. It's kind of like your mum giving you 50 cents and saying, go get yourself something at the corner shop. It's just a nice little treat.
Back when 50 cents could buy you anything.
Oh, yeah,
but
to be
50
honest-
cents can buy you
Oh, yeah, it can buy
a
you.
thrifty card.
It
So we're
definitely
going to
can.
hear a little something about a thrifty card. And as is tradition, I will be performing a monologue. And this week, it's the Cowled Merchant with some new wares. James, would you like to read the card I'm featuring this week?
This guy's selling a dog. Interesting.
Yeah? It's new for him.
Yeah, a natural living creature.
Yeah.
It's kind of disturbing. This is moving into new trade.
Uh-huh.
It's Dreadhound. For 4 black and a black, you get a creature demon dog. It's a 6/6. And when it enters the battlefield, you mill 3 cards. But this is the line of text that gets good. Whenever a creature dies or a creature card is put into a graveyard from your library, each opponent loses 1 life.
People often say to me, Mr. Merchant, you've taken a solemn vow to protect the living animals of this planet. What do you do to your enemies? It's a valid concern, but it has a simple solution. When my enemies taunt me and wish me ill, I turn around and get my evil hound to kill them. She's furious, utterly insane, and she wears a cloak made of darkness and deceit. So really, she's just like any dog. Do me wrong, and you can bet your bottom dollar that she's headed your way to rip a dollar out of your bottom. Get budgeted.
Okay, so I was wrong. He's not selling the dog. He's just bragging about the fact that he's got one. I feel like this is... Dreadhound is the dog that protects his wares.
Yeah.
There you go.
Guard dog. I like
Confirmed.
that. If you enjoyed that, you can check those out every Thursday in the Greensboro Commander Community Discord server in the Thrifty Thursdays channel. That's all linked in the show notes if you enjoyed that absolute insanity that you just experienced.
Very quickly, if you run a Sir Conrad in your deck, run Dreadhound as well.
Yeah, it's so good. And in some
gets there.
cases, it can be even better. In my Arami deck...
Oh, in your Arami deck, it's like it can just win. If you hit the right things, you just close out the game.
I mean, like the like lowest level of it, assuming you have 3 opponents, is pay 6 to encore it. You mill 9,
which is good.
and every single creature that hits your bin deals 3.
Yes, because
to
they all
each?
read.
Yeah, every single one of them reads. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
mill 9, every single thing bolts to your opponents.
That's insanity. And
Wild.
if you can like sack stuff on your board,
Yeah.
like, as they die, it's
Anything
insanity.
else will do it. Oh yeah, well in the end step, they'll all die. Another 3.
Oh yeah, because
everyone.
Arami, the
Yep.
encore tokens do that.
Yeah.
That's so true.
Crazy.
Right, we should get back into noticing the things that aren't there. This is
Yes.
a weird episode.
It is a weird episode, but we have a bit more to talk about. We kind of alluded to it a little bit earlier, but I reckon the next thing we could talk about is almost wins. So I want to
Well, I
talk
guess
about,
we
like,
don't see people that almost win, so I guess we
No.
are noticing the thing that didn't happen, which is they didn't win.
I guess so, but it's not something we really draw attention to in our minds, I guess. So I guess I'm talking specifically about when we sort of recognize that a player has a threatening board state and we respond, but we don't realize just how close the player was to winning. So for instance, they might have had an overwhelming stampede or an Akroma's Will in their hand, or they might have had a combo piece for their Staff of Domination that would have met them go infinite or something.
Right.
We don't see that they almost had it, right? Sometimes we see enough to board wipe, for instance, right? But we don't necessarily see that we just prevented a win. So for a board wipe is what I want to specifically talk about. We obviously see that every creature gets destroyed, right? Like Wrath of God, we see every creature go to the graveyard.
Big reset for everyone.
We see that bit, definitely. But yeah, I think what we don't see is that it can represent the fact that you didn't lose because you cast a board wipe. And sometimes you can take a player completely out of the game.
Yeah, sometimes the player that was like really close to winning, if you board wipe at the right time, they will not win that game. Even though they
No.
were so close, it's because they've spent all of their resources, whether it's building up a board full of tokens or like, getting their graveyard right. And then if you board wipe and completely remove it, that overwhelming stampede now does nothing.
Yeah.
And they have to spend another like 5-6 turns, which to be fair, they don't have.
Yeah.
To try and redeploy that win con.
They might spend the rest of the game trying to get back to the board state they had before, and never get there.
And someone will win before they do.
Yeah, straight up.
I think these ones are funny, the almost wins, because we don't notice them in the moment, but every Commander player will say, if I had one more mana, or if you didn't board wipe, I would have won that turn after the game.
That's true.
After the game, you'll notice this.
I guess this is an easier one to notice for that reason, because no one's going to hide that information from you.
Especially
and if anything,
after
you see
the
people
game.
do the like flipping cards on the top going like,
I would have had it in 2 turns.
only 12 cards down. I would have had the win.
If we kept playing for 12 more turns, I would have had it.
If I drew 12 cards and had 18 more mana, the win would have been mine. James is choking on his victory over there.
I am. I don't know what I've hit.
Jeez.
I'm dying.
Nice.
It's fine. I'm alive.
Yep. He lost the game.
I think I swallowed an air bubble and I needed to like burp or like cough or something. I apologize, listeners.
I hate when I swallow air. While
We
James
should think
sputters
about
over
editing our audio.
While James sputters over that one, I'm going to talk about the next thing that you'll notice with an almost win, which is when someone aims their removal correctly. So sometimes we like make a guess and make a stab when we decide how we're going to deploy our removal spell. Poor James is dying.
I am still coughing.
Oh gosh, no, you're right. When we decide how we're going to use our removal spell, we tend to like narrow down the choices and then make an executive decision, right? We have a few options available to us. We evaluate what we have. I spoke before about checking cards in hand and deciding that way. That's how we decide where we're going to aim that removal spell. We don't always know that we've made the right choice, but sometimes, we see someone look a bit annoyed. We see someone deploying similar cards again when they try to build up their board state again. But we don't necessarily see that we, again, prevented the game from being over. Gosh.
I'm so happy we have individual mics now because I moved away.
Yeah.
I don't know what happened there. I apologize.
No,
to listeners.
you're right.
But I totally agree. We do miss that. We do miss
You
that.
still heard that? Yeah.
I do. I think the well-timed or well-aimed removal is something that you'll see, but you won't. Oh my god! I cannot stop coughing.
No, you're good.
You won't see the result of it.
No.
Keep talking.
Okay. Jeez, James is quietly dying back there. But yes, you definitely see the removal spell and you can see that someone is set back by it. But yeah, you might not see that was the thing they needed to win the game. I think we're going to hit pause here, maybe, and come back in a moment for our next section of the episode. 1 sec.
I'm alive. I'm back.
It sounded a bit like he might die, but he didn't.
Holy hell.
Which is good.
I'm very curious to know how much of the coughing was caught on the microphone because I went to the other corner of the room.
Away. I reckon it was still
I
on
hope
there
you
somewhere.
heard what Walt was saying about well-aimed removal because it's a very good point.
Yes, but we should move to our next one, I reckon, which is basically the kind of next level of this. Like if we're looking at board wipes and we're looking at removal and all the things that they can represent beyond what we can see. The thing that you can have is you can not have removal in your deck or not have enough of it. So the next absence that I think we need to remember that we can notice is cards that aren't in our deck. It's very easy to miss and it's very hard to notice, but basically, we see in games when sometimes there isn't any removal or we don't have any board wipes or we don't have an answer to a problem that presents itself, but we don't necessarily get to that next level, which is that it represents that we don't have enough removal or board wipes in our deck.
See, it's funny that you say that you don't notice it because I get so angry when I don't have the response or the interaction that I need at the time.
I think people get there, but I think what doesn't happen is that people understand that it comes back to the deck. You know what I mean? People will be like,
so this is really revisit your deck building.
Yeah. Pull up your deck list and just have a look at how much removal and how many board wipes are actually there. Just to make sure that you actually had enough outs. Because I've had people I remember there was a game I was playing and someone was kind of digging through their deck trying to find a board wipe. And I was like, oh, how many board wipes are in the deck? And they were like, 1. And I was like, oh, well, I think the chance that you
So you've got a 1 in 99 chance of getting that card then.
It's kind of unlikely, right? But it's sometimes hard for us to remember that and then come back to the deck and revisit it later and go, oh, actually, I might need to up this count a little bit.
And I think that even if you're following the numbers of our deck building template to the letter, right, you could be packing your 7 pieces of targeted removal.
Yeah.
your deck might be folding to problematic permanents. So you need to notice that you need to go up on that number.
Yeah.
That's where you can you might be ignoring the fact because you're like, no, I'm running enough because I've got the 7. Get Commander told me 7, 7, 7.
Yeah.
But we also told you that you need to notice it when it goes up. And if you're a deck, for example, let's say, for example, you're a go wide deck.
Yeah.
And in your meta, in your play group, people love Ghostly Prison and love propaganda effects.
Yeah.
How often do you need to remove those cards?
Yeah.
All the bloody time, I bet.
Need quite a few of those disenchant style effects because, the main thing that's going to stop you is going to be a propaganda or a ghostly prison. And you got to have an out for that.
I do think there's a bit of a warning we can put here, though, of be careful not to turn into an arms race.
Yes.
I think we've talked about that plenty of times, but like an arms race is where, you put something in your deck, so your opponent puts something in their deck to counteract it, and then you put something in your deck to counteract it.
Yeah.
And then the decks just aren't decks anymore.
I think that the thing that you can do to avoid an arms race is usually like removal that's general is fine. Like more disenchant effects might dilute your deck a bit, but you're not going to like prevent someone from having a good time. It's more the silver bullet cards, right?
Yeah,
what we said before. Like, don't yes, if someone's got propaganda, play a card like disenchant. Don't add a card that's like players can't cast enchantment spells. You know what I mean? Like
so true. Yeah,
you're bringing
100%.
a bazooka to a gunfight.
Yes.
It's like I think that maybe in this country western that bazooka is unnecessary.
Yeah, you're bringing a bazooka to a friendly game of Commander.
Yeah.
Settle down there, cowboy. I totally see what you're saying here. This is like, it's a deck building reflection that you can take from a game because you didn't see it happen.
Yeah.
Like, another one, for example, if you're not winning and you're not seeing your win con come up, if you're in that go wide token deck, how many overwhelming stampedes are you running? Like, how many overrun effects are you running? Have you only got the one? Is overwhelming stampede your only win con?
Yeah. In which case, how are you going to find it? Like, you might need more, totally more versions of that effect. You might need a tutor.
More card draw?
Card draw, I think, is a big one. And I think that goes back to everything we were saying just before about removal and board wipes and not having enough of them in the deck. You can also sometimes come about this problem and go about solving it that way when actually the solution is adding more card draw. Because the thing is, you can find those 4 board wipes or those 7 pieces of removal way more often if you have 15 bits of card draw in your deck or 20 bits of card draw in your deck.
Yeah, it's funny. We talk about like how good Swords to Plowshares and Path to Exile are as pieces of removal. And I think sometimes people go like, okay, I've got those 2 in the deck. It's the best of the best.
Yeah.
But we play a singleton format.
Yeah.
It's so surprising how many problems more card draw pieces can solve.
Yeah.
That's why like our template went up. We went to like 15.
I think 15 is what we recommend now. Yeah.
Yeah, we went from like 10. We said 10 and up, and then we went like, you should be getting close to 15 in the current like
even
state
20.
of Commander.
Like, the decks that I have that have more draw power, like, we mentioned Barbala Saga earlier.
Oh, that card. I mean, the Commander draws cards.
It's card draw in the command zone, and God, it feels good to always have a way to dig.
And you're always, like, with that deck, you're always, if you have got like over the amount of cards in your hand for card, like hand size, you know that you're keeping the cards that you need. There is no better feeling on the planet than like discarding down to hand size, knowing that you've got all the responses that you need.
Especially in a deck like mine that cares so much about recursion.
Oh god, you can put things in bid and you're like, I'll get it back later.
Yeah, sometimes you got 8 cards in hand and you have, what's the 1 mana spell, brings back a 3 mana...
Oh, Unearth.
Unearth. You got an Unearth in hand, and you're like, cool, I'll ditch Zulaport Cutthroat. I just got a discount of 1 mana on that spell and kept 7 in my hand.
Yeah.
Super, super good.
I think that reflecting on your deck building post games is something we always recommend.
Yeah.
But instead of looking at the cards that you did see, because that's what often we all do. We all go, this card didn't perform as well as I thought it would. I might cut it. Think about what you didn't see in your hand and what you would have loved to see in your hand at the time.
Yeah. And then definitely if your problem is just that you found you didn't find enough of your stuff, most of the time the answer to that question is card draw.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's what you need.
Put in a heuristic study. There you go.
Again, full circle. The last one I want to mention here is also one that I think is very easy to miss, which is mana, and specifically sort of mana bases. I think it's very easy to go down the route, we all do it as Magic players, of saying like, if I just drawn my green source, or if I just drawn my red source, right?
Hang on,
Look, you
didn't
can
we
get screwed.
stream last night where you kept a risky hand because you had Exotic Orchard in hand?
Look, there was a black deck at the table, and he didn't play a black land till like turn 8.
I'll also
That's
point
not
out
my
that there
fault.
was one player on black and he was in a 3-color deck.
Look, it was a risk, but there was also a really cool card in that hand that I wanted to play. Fey Offering is really good, I promise.
It's a great card. But if you want to see that game, go over to Franken's YouTube
Yeah,
channel.
it's uploaded now, actually.
Yeah.
Or, like 2 weeks ago by the time you guys hear all this.
True.
Yeah, look, I think you can always get mana screwed, and I don't want to say you can ever avoid it completely, but you can reduce the likelihood that it happens because great mana bases don't need very much luck to go their way. And basically, I want to point out the fact that when mana goes wrong, we see that people spent turns drawing cards or ramping to fix colors if we're very astute. I don't think everyone's seeing that, but mostly you might notice that someone's like digging for a land and then going like, they draw a card and go like, oh, and draw a card and go,
To be honest, sometimes they'll very loudly exclaim,
Yeah.
fuck, I
Yes.
need one land.
That can also happen.
Yeah.
And then you'll see someone like with 3 lands be like, oh, I had this spell in my hand, but I guess I'll cultivate. You know what I mean? And like now cultivate is just like hit land drop and find a land. Like not so great.
Get what you're saying.
So yeah, but I think what we miss is what that represents, which is that you're taking entire turns out of the game, not progressing your game plan, right? There's spells now that, like we talked about the invisible spells earlier,
Yeah.
there are invisible uncast spells in your hand, maybe removal and board wipes, cards that you needed to cast.
Yeah, I totally see what you're saying. I think there's like the inverse as well. Like if you don't prioritize these things early game, you'll see it affect you late game.
Yeah.
So like, when you're not prioritizing an efficient card draw engine on field or not prioritizing fixing your colors, you will feel that
Oh, yeah.
late game.
Gosh, the amount of times I've gotten to the end of a game and the person who is like least relevant is just the one who's missed the most land drops.
Yeah, it's
You
really.
know?
I think that's the one thing about Magic the Gathering as a TCG that like a lot of people don't like. When I talk to people being like, "Oh, why do you play that TCG?" Magic is just such a better version of a trading card game. They're like, when you miss land drops, when you get mana screwed or mana flooded, it
Yeah.
sucks. And I'm like, I totally respect that. But like, again, maybe you need to reflect on your deck building because like when you do it right, it does just seamlessly work.
I think it's a double-edged sword, the mana thing, where I think I totally see where people are coming from when they go like, sometimes your deck just doesn't work, but also it's a skill. And I think it's the cost of probably, arguably, the best part of Magic the Gathering, which is the color pie.
Yes,
Magic is not magic if there's not the color pie, and I think that's the cost of it, is that you should have to spend resources. Like when
Yes.
people play 5-color decks and they go like, man, I don't have enough white sources. It's like, yeah, that's the cost of playing 5 colors. That's the way the game's supposed to go. If we all could play 5-color, we all would play 5-color.
Yes,
There'd be no
because
downside.
then we get the best cards all the time without having to think about the resource.
Yeah.
I've said it a million times. Magic the Gathering is a resource management game.
Yeah.
And I think as a final note, I guess, if you don't notice that it is a resource management game and you and you don't look at the resources, you're missing probably the biggest underlying indicator to how well you're going to do in that game and how well your opponents are doing.
100%.
Notice the resources that you've got. Notice the resources your opponents have got.
Yeah, it makes a huge difference. And once you start seeing how mana is doing this thing, you will notice when people don't have access to the mana they need.
For sure.
Well, we need to keep track of a lot of different things in our games, and inevitably, we're going to miss stuff. But if we focus on the things we can't see, the murky depths of our opponents' plans, decks, and hands, we can reliably predict how games will go and become much stronger Commander players ourselves. So, Space Commanders,
Command received. Yeah, nice. This is a really psychoanalyze the absolute hell out of our silly little TCG.
It's one of those deep dives for sure. Thanks for sticking with us. And to you out there, do you feel commanded? What do you think of noticing absence? And which variables are players missing in your games? I want you to talk about those people in your pod who just sometimes miss the stuff that's you think is really obvious, but isn't obvious to them.
Yeah, and is there a variable that we missed?
Yeah, big time.
Let us know. And you can let us know by getting in touch with us on all the social media platforms we're on, like Twitter, Instagram, Threads, @GetCommanded on all those platforms. You can send us an email as well, or you can join the Greensboro Commander Community Discord server, which really is the best place to chat with us, get regular updates from the Get Commanded podcast, and other members of our playgroup are in there, so they're cool to talk to as well and get real insight on what it's like to play against us.
Yeah,
And I will just say as well, go subscribe to our YouTube channel because we'll be throwing up all the amazing streams that we're going to be doing this year. By the time that you see this, we should have a thing on those social media platforms of when we're planning on streaming for the next couple of months. So go check that out. And if you can be with us, remember we're streaming tonight. It's weird to say that because we're in the past. But
we're in the past. But for you, tonight. Or maybe tomorrow morning.
Depending on what country you live in. But yes come join us, twitch.tv/getcommanded.
Yep. And like, we talk about how we want to hear from you. The best way that you can hear from us is live, right?
Yeah.
On
and
Twitch.
The best way to talk to us is live.
Yeah.
We love the chat. We engage with the chat a lot.
And if you want the Get Commanded podcast to be better than it is, the absolute best way you can support us is over on Patreon. It's linked in the show notes. There's a lot of ways you can support us, and there's a lot of benefits that we offer to you for your support. And we'd like to thank our patrons, Stella Tam, Fuzzy, and Bottomless Potamus. And of course, an extra special shout out to Fletcher Cutting, who supports us in the Space Commander tier. You're the best.
You are the best. And look, if you guys are, new year, new you, building new decks, that's what I'm doing after our recent episode where we cut a bunch of my decks.
He's got some room.
I've got some room, so I'm going to need a bunch of new sleeves, deck boxes, and do you know where I'm going to go to get all those?
I suspect you're going to go to palmsoffgaming.com.au /#GetCommanded and receive a 10% discount on your purchases and support the Get Commanded podcast at the same time.
That's exactly where I'm going to go.
Oh, wow.
That's exactly where I'm going to go. Once again, I'm going to go to palmsoffgaming.com.au /#GetCommanded and get 10% off my order and support the show at the same time. I've actually just today been talking to the Palms Off Gaming crew, and I'm not going to say who, but someone at Palms Off Gaming has just bought their first pre-con.
That's exciting.
Commander. So
that is exciting.
We're turning this Yu-Gi-Oh! Pokemon. They're definitely Pokemon nerds, first and foremost, the pod crew. We'll get them hooked on Commander. Watch this space.
Keen, love that idea. Honestly, it's like every Commander player that we gain is a gem that we must cherish.
And we'll mold the fuck out of them.
We don't say that on the podcast, James. That's all the magic stuff we have. I guess we should planeswalk out of Magic into somewhere else.
It's your turn, but I know exactly where you're going. Because when I walked into your house today...
I knew you would mention this.
You were like face buried in your Switch.
You were like waving your hand.
I literally waved it in front of his face and he didn't even blink. I think he's been playing the game for at least 6 hours.
I blinked and returned to what I was doing. Thank you.
What game have you been playing recently, Walt?
I've been playing Fire Emblem 3 Houses. Yes, I know I'm literally 5 years behind.
But as we know from Walt playing Breath of the Wild...
about a year ago. Less than a year ago. Yeah, it's the way that I do stuff. I wait for the games to go on sale. Look, it's sweet. I used to play on my Game Boy emulator on my PC, like laptop.
You were such a nerd.
I was a huge nerd. I had a Game Boy way back when, but I didn't have it anymore. And obviously with a Game Boy emulator, you can download every game ever. I used to play this fantastic series called Fire Emblem. I was playing, it was just called Fire Emblem in the States. I think it's actually called Fire Emblem Blazing Sword or something. I played that, and I played Fire Emblem Sacred Stones.
How many games has Fire Emblem got?
Well... I didn't realize. I thought they were like the first 2. That was the 6th and 7th games in the series.
And how old were you when you were playing this?
I was like 14, 15, maybe. But these
like
games were already
school.
old.
Yeah.
They probably came out when we were in primary school.
Jeez.
Sorry if that dates you all out there at all. But I have fully jumped about 10 games ahead. Fire Emblem 3 Houses is the 16th game in the series.
Hell.
It's a hell of a jump. Basically, it's like not a real time. It's a turn-based strategy game, but it's also an RPG. So you kind of have a character, and the best part of the game to me is as people have certain compatibilities with one another, right? You got like this party. It's very D&D vibes. You got a party full of people with different skill sets, but they also are compatible with each other in different ways.
Right.
And as they battle, if you put them next to each other, like on the board, they slowly like form affection for one another, and eventually they have conversations with each other.
What?
And the longer they spend next to each other, the stronger their bond gets. And when you finish a Fire Emblem game, you get a custom end depending on how strong the players' connections with each other were.
Whoa.
And so you'll get
That's so cool.
like Joshua and what was the one that I forget her name, Isabel, I think. Joshua and Isabel were like in a particular game, and if you got them close enough, they would get to the end and it'd be like Joshua, like she was like a princess. He's like Joshua, like took her away one day, and they never returned to the kingdom, and are happily married in like South.
So that gives you an excuse to replay the game and get a different ending.
Different ones. And the great thing about Three Houses is at the start of the game, you choose a house to be the professor of, and you train up. So there's even more of this RPG stuff of like training people and like shaping their goals.
Right.
And you can choose which people will band together and that kind of thing. But then I can go play the game again and choose a different house, and I will have different students with different responses to each other.
I feel like these types of games, like RPG games, from like my understanding, because I'm not a big RPG gamer. Like
Sure.
I've never really played Skyrim.
Yeah.
Even like I'm not even big on those games. But like Baldur's Gate 3, wasn't that Game of the Year last year?
Oh, if not, then it should have been.
I'm pretty sure it was. I think that just like these types of games are hooking people because it is just like, it's like D&D, and I think even the surge of D&D becoming so popular in the last couple of years is showing how much people love being somebody else.
Yeah.
Just for a little bit. It's like this escapism trend. And I love it. I think it's great.
I think like when it's merged with the mechanics of a game, it becomes especially good. So that's what I didn't mention, is that like as people's bond grows, they also battle better when they're near each other.
Also, it's like you get like in-game advantages of this RPG thing, right?
Which I think is like games have so much replay ability when they have like personality that is interesting and you can like play with like and matching up and that kind of thing.
But when it links to the game,
to the mechanics itself, because there's lots of games that like have really cool like RPG sort of things of like relationship building and stuff, but it's pretty rare, I think. Well, maybe less rare these days, that it affects the mechanics. And I love when it feels like, those conversations...
There's like a point system associated with it or something.
That conversation you had with that player, like that other character, like means something in like numbers in the game.
There's a code behind that conversation. It's really cool.
Like there's a character in Fire Emblem 3 Houses. He's the head of the house. He's like sort of, I think he's supposed to be the prince. His name's Dimitri. He's great character, very well written, horrifying backstory from what I know so far.
Hashtag spoilers for a 5-year-old game.
Anyway, horrifying is not telling you anything. He has this guy who also has a horrifying backstory named Dudu, who has like sworn to be his like knight, his like protector. And so when they fight next to each other and they've like had conversations with each other about how much they care for one another, and you know that because of the strength of their relationship, it is harder to hit Dimitri if you're the enemy. It's like, Dudu's standing there and he's like blocking with his shield. Like, it's cool. Isn't that such a cool image that conjures in your head? I love stuff like that.
Do you know, and because I can see you're itching to just go back to playing this game now. Do you want to do the sign-off thing so you can go back to playing this game?
I played Three Houses. Never mind the fact that I've got to spend time with my partner, which is obviously important. Never mind. Three Houses has my heart.
The one and only love. For the next 6 months where you're obsessively obsessing over it.
And then I'll drop it and never play it again, knowing the way my brain works. Anyway, that's all we have time for. We'll see you next Friday for another transmission from the Space Commanders.
Goodbye, Commander players.